On this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, we talked to Alberto de Icaza, mixing and mastering engineer from Austin, Texas. We talked to Alberto about getting his start coming up under Machine and Will Putney.
So I started talking with Will, and Will was like, yeah, dude, come over. Let's interview you for an internship here.
And how he transitioned from working in heavy music into the film and soundtrack world.
So they send me this stuff, right? I do the track, and they're like, oh, by the way, yeah, the producer's Timbaland. And I'm like, I know that one.
And we asked Alberto to spill his secrets on getting great masters.
Kind of how I approach mastering is
Welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I'm your host, Drew, here with my co-host, Josh. Say hi to the people, Josh.
Hi.
Hello. And today we are excited to have Alberto de Icaza with us out in Austin, Texas. Bro, super excited to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, guys.
Yeah, man. It's cool. You came, I think somehow me and you got connected on Instagram, or like I found you on Instagram or something like that. And I was like, yeah, this dude's doing some really cool stuff. I enjoy like your work. And on top of that, I was just kind of, looking through some of your content and some other things. And I was like, man, this guy knows what he's talking about. So I really want to get him on the podcast and kind of
thanks, man.
Generally chat and hang out. You know what I mean?
I feel like I'm pretty bad at social media in general, especially since, everybody started doing reels and tips and tricks and stuff. I'm like, I don't have time for that. Or like, I'm not, I'm not that guy. But it definitely, Instagram has led me to connect with so many awesome people. So
dude, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. Well, so let's start with, maybe before we get into your story, let's start for the people that don't know you. Yeah. Just kind of like who you are, what you do, and the general thing.
Cool. Well, I'm Alberto. I'm in Austin, Texas. Mostly mixing and mastering now. Every now and then I'll do a record. I started in the heavy world, and I kind of moved in the past like 4 or 5 years to doing a lot of soundtracks. I do some hip hop and a little bit of everything. I work with some indie artists. Yeah,
dude. No, your soundtrack stuff is crazy. It's really funny that when I kind of initially started following you and looking at your stuff, I was like, oh, he does really cool mixing and mastering work. Like, this is really sick. Yeah. And then I don't know if it was just you started posting about it more or you just started getting more of the work, but I don't know if it was you started posting about it more, you started getting more of the work, but I started seeing you post all these like soundtrack stuff that you started doing. I was like, yo, bro is freaking going in right now on this stuff.
Yeah. It's crazy in that world, man. Like some days I'm always like, oh shit, is there anything else coming out? Like, is there any work? And then out of nowhere, it's like, boom, here's, 60 songs you need to get on now.
Yeah. Cause you're doing all the cues for that stuff, which is probably, right. That's crazy. Well, we'll get into that, I think, a little bit later. Let's maybe right now start into like kind of how'd you get started in music production, and maybe just like, getting started in bands and music, working through all that stuff, and then maybe up till current.
Awesome. I grew up in Mexico City, and as a kid, I was like, I love playing guitar. I started a band with a couple friends, and we were doing that thing for a couple of years. And I feel like it was fun. It was nothing amazing of the sorts, but it definitely pushed me into like, this is what I want to do. And at the time, I thought I just wanted to go to college for maybe like learning professionally guitar. I was very into classical guitar at the time. And, I was kind of getting like a very rounded guitar education, if anything.
Okay.
And so my parents were terrified about, me going into music, especially living in Mexico. It was like, this is going to end in tears,
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out like something else, and like they were trying to poke my interest at different things. And my dad had a friend that he does kind of like big production shows, but more like the auto show, for example, or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he took me with him one summer, and he was like, "Hey, how about you intern with him?" And I was talking with him, and I was telling him, I want to do the music thing. He's like, "Well, I don't do anything with music here, but there's a studio across the street that when I need anything, they're the ones that do it." So he took me there, and they kind of took me in as their intern for a couple of years there. And it was mostly, they were doing like movies over there.
Okay.
and kind of like short films and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, awesome guys. They all, of course, they all had bands, so I got
Mhm.
to like check out the music side, and that kind of poked my interest because I was always like good at computers, but also like music was my thing. So
Mhm.
that kind of like put the bug in my head, like, oh, this is cool. This is kind of like an in between of what I could be doing. And at the time, I found like audio engineering schools were starting. Everybody had like different names for them.
Mhm.
Um, so I found like this. It was a college in the UK that was doing like music technology, and I was like, okay, that sounds cool. Let's check it out. And then I saw that there was a bunch in the US doing the same thing, so I was like, cool. I kind of want to go there and like start a career because I wasn't a fan of living in Mexico. I kind of wanted to venture out.
Yeah.
Um, and I was very into the heavy scene, so I was like, there's nothing for me here right now.
Mhm.
It was very underground and like not something. It was something you did for fun. Like it didn't seem to me like something that I could like make a living out of.
Yeah.
So I ended up moving to New Jersey to go to college. And while I was there, I started to look for internships. And, a couple years in, um, I was just going through all my records, like, okay, this is probably going to date me, but, you have your CDs out and I'm like looking at like all these
Yeah.
producer names, like who did this and where are they? And Facebook was, a thing at the time where I could just like look up and like, maybe you'll hit up a group and like find one of these guys and find their emails or whatever. And so I had Lamb of God's Sacrament, right? And I found Machine. And of course I've watched,
Yeah.
the documentary, how they did it and stuff. And I was like, this looks
Mhm.
fucking awesome. Um,
Yeah.
and I found that he was in New Jersey and he was pretty close to where I was, like maybe like 15 minutes away.
Mhm.
Um, and I found an email and I actually found Will Putney email, who he was his engineer at the time.
Yeah.
So I started talking with Will, and Will was like, "Yeah, dude, come over. Let's interview you for an internship here, right?" Um, and I think it was the summer when I was finally talking with him, and I was in Mexico, and I was like, I'll be there in a month. Like, is it still cool?" He's like, "Yeah, come on over whenever." So I went, did an interview with them, and it was cool. Uh, it definitely felt like, oh, these guys are like my people. Like I love
Yeah.
this
For
kind of
sure.
place. And um, at that time, the studio was still in Weehawken, which is the
Mhm.
one, like if you've seen that Lamb of God film, like
Yes,
that's
the
where it
same.
was, or like the
Yeah.
Suicide Silence stuff. Um, and it was pretty interesting. So I got there, and Will was starting Fit for an Autopsy. There were some demos that he was working on
Oh,
for
dang.
the first record.
Yeah.
Um, and that was also another thing. Like I feel like I grew up more with like thrash music, and
Mhm.
that was like my level of, like I would say like maybe some metalcore. But when I got here and like Will introduced me to deathcore, I was like, holy shit, this is fucking
You're like,
crazy. Yeah,
"Oh, it gets heavier."
yeah, like exactly. Like this
Yeah.
is like borderline unlistenable. Like this is
Yeah.
insane. Um, but I completely got it eventually, and I was
Mhm.
like, yeah, this is fucking cool. Um, and just being an intern there, of course, there was like 4 or 5 of us, but I was like all in for this, and it just happened that a couple months in, they were moving to the studio in Belleville.
Mhm.
Um, so I kind of got to be part of that like transition of moving everything over there. And the first recordings we were there where there was no heat or anything, it was just an empty warehouse, and we're
Yeah.
like there with like and jackets, like freezing our asses off, tracking drums, kind of
Yeah.
and it was pretty cool too, because I feel like it's an experience that not a lot of people have now, because a lot of people just kind of learn online and they just try
Yeah.
things that they see online. Like that's a great resource, but at the same time, just being able to learn from somebody, like it gives you such a more rounded education on the business side and like the things you got to do. Um,
100%.
because I see it a
So
lot. Like there's a lot of guys, that I talk to that just learn online, and you know, simple things like building patterns or building your room. They're like, oh well,
mhm.
it's expensive. How am I gonna buy that? I'm like, dude, you fucking like find wood, you find
Yep.
fabric at the cheapest
Yeah.
fucking Joanne place,
Yeah.
and like you have to like find a source for this
Yeah,
stuff, and
you
like
just have to build it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I missed out on. I've talked about it like a few times on the podcast where like I grew up in Pittsburgh, and there was like maybe like 4 or 5 studios in town, and only one of them was like busy enough to even entertain the thought of having unpaid interns,
Right.
And so like I had to learn on my own. There were like no other producers that I connected with. Like, I was working in metal music and like trying to do that whole thing, working with
Mhm.
local bands, and then eventually, I got into pop music, but I got to this point where I was like, oh, I'm pretty good. Like I can compete. It wasn't until I moved down to Atlanta 2 years ago and I started working with Lee all the time. And I was like, oh wait, I don't think I actually know that much. I'm not that good.
Yeah.
Like I was like a Pittsburgh 7.
Yeah.
But then as soon as you take me out of that element, like I'm a 3 on a good day, and like so now like anytime like like someone's kid is interested in music and they're like, oh, what should I tell them? And blah, 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 blah. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, just like find somebody who's like successful and just hang out. At the
Yeah.
bare
Yeah.
minimum, just hang out because
And
you will learn a ton and you will
right.
learn so much more than if you're spending money on courses or if you're, going to school for it.
Yeah.
And like, I think that it's like vital that like you
Right.
find someone who's like better than you and help them out,
And I feel like there's also a couple things that you learn. Like you need somebody that's going to inspire you at a different level. To me, it's hard. Like watching a video, like you see, you watch a video of Andy Wallace mixing, and it's like, holy shit, this guy's a unicorn, right?
Yeah.
You don't get to meet him as a person and see that he's human and see that maybe he has flaws, and like you get to connect with this person.
That's been the biggest thing for me is like hearing songs that were sent out for pitch that ended up placing with huge artists, but like hearing the original demo and being like, whoa, it changed a lot. Or like hearing mixes that didn't make it from big mixers, or hearing big productions from big producers that didn't make the record. And you're like, oh, like everybody misses,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
everybody isn't fantastic 100% of the time. Like it makes me wonder, like, how many like unreleased Max Martin songs are there?
Oh, there has to be
Probably
an incredible amount.
Whole freaking warehouse of them.
I mean, I know that there's a lot of unreleased Rick Rubin records, and like it's really interesting. It's a confidence booster in one way, but then also it's like sometimes you hear guys on a bad day and you're like, whoa, they're still beating me.
And there's so many areas. I feel like that's one of the hardest parts of this kind of like line of work, because you're sold on a lot of these stuff that you work on, right? And I mean, working with Machine, it was, especially when I started, it was a big thing. Like Machine goes all in. He 100% believes in the work he's doing, right? So you're doing these records and you're like, oh, this is going to be huge. Like I'm connecting with this at a whole different level. And then sometimes you see that he just doesn't, it doesn't do a bleep on the radar, and you're like, but why? Like you get mad at people like, how, how are you guys not getting this?
Yeah.
And sometimes the opposite happens. Like things that you're like,
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Like I didn't think this was going to move the needle. It's like, oh, surprise. Everybody loves this shit now.
For sure. Yeah. And I think the other thing, the other aspect of like being in a space is also like learning to interact with people and like learning to like be cool to the band and like be respectful to the engineer, and like if there's a separate engineer producer relationship, like learning who to go to for what, or learning how like the the hierarchy of how all that works in a studio.
Absolutely.
Until you've been in it, there's no way to know.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just now like at the point where there's kind of like this sixth sense that you get. Like whenever you hear a demo from an artist, you're immediately able to tell like if it's going to be a great record or not. Even if it's just a voice note, or even if maybe they aren't the best singer in the world, like you're still able to like get that vibe. And I feel like it's saving me a lot of problems as of late.
And also learning how to coach an artist is also in the studio is also
that's
like
facts.
until you're in the situation doing it in a studio, like there's no replacement. And so I would rather watch an experienced person handle that well than make a bunch of mistakes myself personally.
Yeah, there's I do editing for an R&B producer in town, and sometimes like he'll send me tracks, and I feel like I've learned so much just from hearing vocalists without tune on their voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I started a conversation in one of the Discord servers I'm in last night where I was like, "Do you guys hate tracking with autotune anymore?" You know, because like I feel like, I don't know. For me, I don't feel like most of the artists that I've worked with actually get like better takes once they have tune on their voice.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that I can think of where they were like, "I can't hear myself out of tune. It kills my confidence." You know?
Yeah.
But I feel like just from doing like shitty things, you know, like it's not great being the guy who has to edit a vocal, you know.
Right.
But it's like you learn so much just from doing it, where it's like, oh yeah, if I heard that take, I would have had them do it again, or I would have like talked them through it and like figured out how to get the take. And like, you know, I think that
or maybe that was
just
them talking through it and getting the take and then learning like
no shot, because
Yeah,
there were
well,
some crazy takes
okay.
on this.
But
There
I'm
were
just
some
saying like
nutty
that could also
takes.
be the case.
Yeah, yeah, but it's just I don't know. It's just really, really interesting. I texted Lee last night, and I was like,
Yeah.
dude, it's like kind of crazy. Like whenever you dig into some of these project files and you see what other people do,
Right.
and on one hand, it's like, man, I can't believe that that was so simple and it worked. Or it was like it's a splice loop that I've definitely heard, and I'm like,
Right.
oh, this goes crazy, you know. Or it's like the total opposite, where it's like, man, I'm so thankful that like you don't do that in the sessions that we work on together. You know?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and I mean that was something that I'm very grateful, because editing vocals was never my forte, especially like tuning. You know, there was always like half steps that I will miss on like little things. And you know, with a machine will be so patient where like I'll have a whole session, a whole record, and they'll just come and, you know, like color things differently and be like, he's all the fuck ups, like, oh, go and fuck it, like go listen to it and do it again, and like, you know, they'll check on me. And it was such a formative experience for me.
Yeah, that's kind of how it was whenever I started working with Lee on things. He's really, really great at vocals. I think that that's like one of the strongest things that he has going for him. It's like that, and then like drums, you know, like he's the best. And so like I love doing vocals. I love cutting the vocal. I love editing the vocal. I love working with the artist and all that. And so like the game plan was like whenever we work together to have me do all that, because he hates that process, even though he's really good at it. And I remember like the first session that we did, you know, like I start editing and he's just like, no, you're doing it all wrong. I'm like, what do you mean I'm doing it wrong? This is how you know, and you know, after a lot of time of, you know, like really hearing the difference, like you don't get it until you try it. And then someone says that's not good enough, and then they do it, and then you hear what they were hearing.
Right.
That's like whenever you really start to make progress.
I mean, that's a big thing that you can get from watching a screen, right? Like they have to teach you how to listen. And that's a crazy part. Like I can show you how to use a compressor and I can show you my settings, but I can't, you know, unless you're sitting here with me and I'm telling you like, well, listen how it is, you know, in relationship to the drums. Listen how like me compressing this now, all the S's and the hats are like clashing together, right? Like stuff like that, that is like, you really need to sit down right next to somebody that's doing it and like get it.
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
So you were in Jersey at this point. You're working with Machine and Will, and you moved to the new spot. So what transitioned you from Machine Shop to, I guess it was Machine Shop at that point, right?
Yeah, it was Machine Shop. So whenever we moved to the new spot, this is also a point in Will's career where he's doing so many records, he's very busy. And he was Machine's main engineer, right? So there was like room for growth there. And it was me and Randy that got in at the same time.
Oh, okay.
I think he came in like maybe a week after me or something, right?
Nice.
That's cool.
So I gravitated towards Machine and Randy gravitated towards Will.
Yeah.
So we were both kind of like just busy all the time. And so whenever we moved to the Jersey spot, to the Belleville spot, it was pretty cool because it was big.
Yeah.
And it was an empty warehouse with all these rooms that You know, like at some point there was trash in one room from all the construction we've been doing, and I just like clean it up, and like I was like, dude, can I just go buy paint and like put a rug here and turn this into my room? And they're like, yeah, whatever, I don't give a shit, you know. Like
That's crazy.
So there was like things like that kept happening, and you know, back to what I was saying, like it's you learn to do more things. They make fun of me because I couldn't hold a drill straight when I came in, and then by the end, like, you know, I was doing electrical work and like putting up walls and shit like that. And you know, we did so much building in there, and it was a pretty great spot too, because there was so many talented engineers coming through the doors. Like Zach Servini came an intern there, right? And it's crazy, like being an intern with. Oh yeah,
I didn't know that he interned.
Oh yeah, that's Zach was in high school when he came in, and I was like, holy shit, this dude's like a force to be reckoned with. Like he's, you know, he's super talented, and he has no clue about it yet.
Damn.
Yeah, that was, you know, he was from Connecticut, so he came over for a summer, I want to say. Yeah, awesome dude. And then so yeah, being surrounded by all these guys was super cool. Machine had plans to move to Texas for a couple of years, and he's been talking about it since I know him. And you know, at the time I was like, well, I mean, I'm down to, you know, change sceneries. I had been over there for about 7 years.
Okay.
And you know, and I was mostly working with him. I was excited to just try something new. So he bought land here, and we built that barn studio.
Yeah.
So yeah, I moved in like maybe 3 months before him and started like working with these people to like put it up.
Gotcha. What year was this when you moved?
This was 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we built a studio. It was pretty cool. I don't know. Have you been there?
I haven't seen it. No, gotcha. I've seen pictures from somebody, but yeah, I've seen pictures of the place. I know what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not small.
No. It's in the hill country. Like it's, you know, it's a cool place, cool spot.
It's a really cool getaway studio. I think that's another reason why a lot of people like it. It's like because it is in the middle of nowhere.
Right. Which at the time was kind of hard for me because I couldn't, like, it was expensive for me to bring bands there. And I feel like I was struggling to like just keep more bands coming in constantly. You know, I had like random spots, and I was just working mostly on Machine's record. So at some point and I also had like a car accident over there, and I was like, you know what, I need something different with my life right now. Like this is not working. So a friend of mine was starting a label, and I was like, yeah, I'm interested to like kind of learn more about that and like see what happens on that side. So I kind of helped him put it all up. And through this label, I started getting like doing some work for them. It was, you know, it was small, but we could develop artists. That was the whole goal of this label. It was like artist friendly. So I was like, cool, you know, I could do a couple of records here with bands that I give a shit about, and like, you know, try to develop it. And we signed a couple of artists that did pretty good. And their plans were eventually buy a studio, which they bought in downtown Austin. So I was like, cool, we'll just, you know, build this commercial studio and it'll be fun and awesome.
Yeah.
That worked out for a couple of years, and the studio was just taking forever. They just finished it like last year's, and this was 2016 when we started. So yeah, at some point, it wasn't working with me, and like I don't know that they were happy with me, and we just parted ways.
Yeah.
And you know, at the time, I just kind of had a little setup in my apartment, and you know, it was like looking back at pictures, I'm like, oh my god, this is like shameful, you know. Like I don't know how I was making that work, but through that, I started mastering records, and that was kind of like a pretty common thing that people would just ask me for. And I was like, cool, maybe I'll just mix and master. Like I'll focus on that. I don't have space to track right now, but and also I felt like going to track a record was way too expensive. I had to find like a you know, budget friendly studio around here where I could do it and that it actually had like cool shit to do. And I think like I was also a little burnt out. Like I met my wife at that point, we got married, and I was like, well, yeah, I also want to have a life outside of being in the studio all day, every day.
Yeah.
And,
do you have kids now?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I just
But
have
like
to.
even like getting in like a relationship, like a heavy relationship like that
Right.
is like you start looking at your life very differently and going
Yeah.
like, well, like I could potentially do more than just work all the time.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And I feel like it's very easy to fall in this trap, of like, uh, just the studio is everything. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
since it's your passion projects happening there as well. Like
Yeah.
it's very easy to get caught up on like, oh yeah, I'm working on that record, and then I'm gonna write a song, and then I'm gonna do my own thing, and
Yep.
There's like the whole thing where like it becomes your entire identity, and then
absolutely.
you're like, oh my god, like I'm actually kind of boring. Like if you took out music, there's nothing left to me,
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
person. I feel like everybody deals with that.
And the crazy shit too is like you make really good friends with people in bands, right? Because bands
Mhm.
were coming and staying with us for like almost a month.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'll make really close relationship with these people, and then it's like, well, cool. Now that the record's over, like I'll see you in a year when you come
Yep.
through the state, or So that was a little hard too, because a lot of my social circle was just like people coming in and out,
Yeah.
But I mean, I enjoyed it, and it was cool and stuff. But I just kind of feel like I needed a change, and I feel like also like moving to Texas, it was different because I was more busy before because I was able to work on Will's records at the same
Mhm.
time. Um, but it wasn't working out.
Yeah.
So I created my own thing, and I kind of had to take it from the ground up. We bought a house in 2016, and the guys from Crowbot, the guitar player, wanted to move to Austin, so he ended up moving with his wife here to our house, and we just bought a house. We're like, cool, it's big enough. There's a room I can make a studio in there.
Yeah.
And they were here for about a year, and then they left. And it's a 2-story house, and this was the living room that was upstairs. So I just converted it into my studio. My wife was like, yeah, I never go upstairs. What do you want to take that as a studio? I'm like, yes.
Yes.
Check.
I will take a whole floor. Thank you.
We don't need a game room. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty neat because we have like a guest room with a bathroom here, and we have offices in the back. So if I have a singer or whatever, like they can come sleep here.
Yeah.
Just be here all day.
Yeah. No, that's really sick. And
yeah.
And I will say, like, going into just doing mixing and mastering, it just kind of changes how you think about what you're doing, right? Because, like,
Absolutely.
that's I don't know. I struggle with, like, I think there's a lot to be said for really good tracking engineers. Obviously, they're great.
Mhm.
They're fantastic. But for the work consistency, like having a space that you can not have to spend, like we were saying, like all these people are moving into Austin now, and they're buying these houses, they're turning them into recording studios because you don't need a massive multi-million-dollar facility to do it. Now, are they awesome? Yes. Are there times when those are super necessary? Probably. Maybe. But
yeah, debatable. Like
debatable. Yeah, debatable.
It,
but
like,
and it depends on, who you are, what's your budget, how, like what level of artist you are, like all those kind of come into play as well. Like, are you trying to go to a place and not leave for a month? You're going to need a large enough studio to like deal with all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, amazing records are being done in, home, like houses, literally.
Exactly.
That's like what everything is. Like, I mean, especially with like the cost of housing in LA, it's like kind of unreal. There's this mastering engineer in one of the discords I'm in, and for a long time he was like developing like people's rooms for them. And he will talk about like some of the projects that he's worked on, and it's like almost every single one is just in somebody's house because like it's so expensive to get a separate building. And it's like if you need to record drums or horns or strings or whatever, like typically those projects are also big enough that like you have the budget to just get a studio for the day,
Right.
And I think it's the smarter move,
I think so too. I think it's like part of the model now with how to make a studio profitable. If you're spending all your money in that real estate, and royalties are not what they used to be, it's your budgets are shrinking, so you gotta make the most out of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very interested to see what happens here. I had like culture shock when I moved to Atlanta because I went from a place with no good studios. If Matt, if you're listening to this, you have a great studio. I meant big studios, not great studios. He's the owner of the studio I used to work out of back home. And so like when I moved to Atlanta, like I started looking up like recording studios Atlanta. I'm just going down the list, and like these places look like resorts,
Right.
like they're super luxurious, and like they have their rates posted, and it's like, oh yeah, it's only $2,500 for a day without an engineer. And
Right.
I was completely blown away, because like I thought that was only something that you would see in like Los Angeles or like maybe New York,
Oh no, dude.
But like with hip hop being so big here, it's like every single studio, it's just like, oh yeah, it just looks super super nice. Your vocal chain is just a U87 into a 1073 and a CO1B. It's $2,500 a day,
right?
And you're like, what? It's crazy. And so I'm interested to see how that happens. It seems like a lot of these hip hop artists, like they get signed with like these bigger budgets because like the label knows they're going to be in the studio every day. And a lot of artists are like locking out facilities and stuff like that. There's one studio that if you look it up, it says it's closed because it's indefinitely being rented out by a couple hip hop artists.
Yeah.
Which I thought was crazy, because like we all thought that like, I was hearing fabled stories about this studio, and then my one friend is in town and I'm like, where are you working out of? And he says that studio, and he lets me know what's going on. And I was like, that's nuts, because it's just such a different thing down here. It's like every night these guys are in there all night just working.
Yeah,
interesting.
Atlanta's also kind of a different beast from every other music. Like,
Atlanta
is not the normal when it comes to any kind of recording or studios or artist development.
It's like kind of crazy. Like I'm starting to meet more and more artists, and they're always like so stoked that I could do other things than just like throw a sample into Gross Beat, because like everybody's a producer in Atlanta, but like most of them are just like making the same trap beats that we've heard for years now. And so it's kind of it makes me feel good about myself.
Nice.
So you kind of break off and start doing your own thing, right? How was that transition for you? Because I know that transition for a lot of people can be really tough when you're coming from like working for somebody, and like, obviously you do your own stuff on the side, and like you probably have a lot of your own projects as well, but then like going full on your own.
It was hard. A couple things. The Machine Shop brand had a bunch of followers at that point. And everybody, like Will was under that brand as well. So we will get a lot of clients just based on that, right? Like just people asking like, holy shit, yeah, the stuff that's coming out of there is insane.
There's like an air to the name.
Right. And, something that I learned is I never did a good job of branding myself at all. Right. Feel like my name is so complicated to begin with that it's not something you'll remember, it rolls off the tongue easily. So I had to like figure something out. So that's where the whole albertomixes started with. I was like, that's easy. People will remember that. And whatever. I thought at the time I was doing more mixing, so I was like, I think that's it's the way to go. Let's just go that way.
I was always weird about that too, because like growing up, everybody like misspelled my last name and all that stuff, and I've always been like kind of like self-conscious about like making that my brand. And finally, I was like, you know what? It's just gonna be my website name. I'm just gonna do it, But I don't know. I think that it's really cool that you did, Alberto mixes. It's so simple.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of trending now, like you see a lot of people using that or masters. I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. You work for me. So I started doing that. And what was the tipping point for me to go full into mastering, I feel like was right before the pandemic hit. I think it's like maybe like 2019. So there's this management company that I had worked with previously at the label that I was working with, and I've been mastering stuff for them for their indie artists. Shout out to the Sound Club. they hit me up and they were like, "Yeah, do you do hip hop?" It's like, well, I've never done it, but I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Cool. Here's here's a couple songs that we need. It's for a soundtrack for a what's it called? It's a YouTube original series. If the producer likes it, like you're all good. You just kind of have to match. Like, here's the song that the producer mastered, and it's gonna be in the same record. So you just kind of match it, and like, if he gets it, he gets it."
Yeah.
Side note, I'm completely ignorant to hip hop. Right, I grew up with metal. At this
you're
point,
coming from like, full metal at this point. Yeah,
right. And like, I feel like just also like growing up in Mexico, like I skipped that. I had like the basics. Like sure, there was like the Eminem or like Snoop Dogg. Like I could tell you 5 or 6 guys, but that's about it, right? R&B definitely like didn't make it to my house at all.
Yeah.
And also, I never had like older brothers or cousins or anything. I'm the oldest, so I didn't have somebody like passing me down the records.
Yeah.
So I was making my way as I could. So they send me this stuff, right? I do the track, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, the producer's Timbaland," and I'm like, "I know that one." Like, shit.
Oh my gosh.
So the stress is some, and I'm like, "Cool, I'll just do what I do and like hope he likes it."
Oh god.
So I sent it, and they liked it. My wife came home that day from work, and she's like, "Yeah, like what?" I was telling her about this crazy shit, and she's like, "Well, who was the artist?" I'm like, I don't know. It was some dude named Neo." And she's like, "What? Like, pull it up, please. Like, look it up." So that was my introduction to doing soundtracks, right? They like that stuff.
That's how you got into soundtrack? Yeah. With a Neo
stumbling my way upon stuff. Yeah.
God.
It was for that series called Step Up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from that came out through Lionsgate, and they started throwing me more stuff, right? And with it, Manhunt had like, I think it was like season 2, and they kind of started throwing me more stuff to master, and it was pretty interesting too because everything was very left field. Like, one day you get hip hop, the next day it's like classical or ethereal stuff, or like you never know what's gonna happen. So I started getting more of that stuff. They like what I do. Back to what you were saying of like, you kind of start picking up things that, and how stuff was recorded or how stuff is glued together. And like, I feel like this gave my mastering a whole different set of tools, because whenever you're just working in one genre, like you kind of learn the tricks for that, and that's that. Here I feel like I have to be way more versatile, so I had to like adapt my workflow where I have everything set up exactly how I need it, so that the moment I hear anything, like it could be an orchestra going fucking balls to the wall, everybody hitting one note, or it could be a hip hop track with a sub just blowing the whole fucking thing up. I got to know where to go to like tackle that immediately.
Or or if it's just an acoustic track with a vocal, like that also feels like, but you got to be ready for the full gambit of all of that.
It's also one of those things, I feel like coming up in metal, kind of like, if you get it, the transition, then you'll be fine. Right. Because like metal is so heavy handed. Like I remember I had a friend who like didn't really come up making, any sort of like rock music, and he was trying to mix this rock song, and I'm like staying at his house at the time, and he's like, "What do I have to do to this vocal to make it sound good?" And I'm like, "How much compression are you putting on it?" He's like, "Oh, like 3 to 6 dB on whatever compressor." And I was like,
fucking crush that shit.
I was like, all right, dude. So you know how they got the vocals to sound like that? You have to pin the 1176 and then put it into either a distressor or an LA2A, and get that cooking, up to like 10 dB. And he looked at me and he was like, "I'm not doing that." I was like,
"Try
you
it.
need to
give it a shot."
And then like an hour later, he like finally tried it, and he was like, "I can't believe that worked. I would never do that." I was like, "Yes, now you understand what the unlearning process is like for me." Where it's like in hip hop, it's like you're barely compressing vocals most of the time,
right?
Because they want it to be so punchy.
Talk about the song. They push everything to the wall like nothing else. Like, dude, there's and at all levels. Like, there was. I
remember when I stopped using a compressor on my master bus, and with like pop music, and I was like, "Oh wow, yeah, that that's kind of crazy, you know?
Yeah.
like I don't know, just like clipping everything and not being so heavy-handed with compression is wild. And then everything's way brighter, you know.
And, well, yeah, because they're using so much limiting, like, and I feel like that's also something I've noticed that comes out of Atlanta a lot. Like they like distorting their 808s and their sub kicks, and then because everything is so limited, it gets bright as shit, you know. But
half the process is taming all of that.
There was one song I got that it was like negative 1.5 RMS on the mix. I'm like,
good lord.
Like, okay, we got to tackle this, I guess. I'm putting in a record with songs from all these different people. Like, it's not just the same guy mixing the record, right?
Dang.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, you'll get crazy stuff like that where it's like, you better learn how to do stuff or like figure it out.
Yeah.
Dude,
it's crazy.
So you slide into this world of doing soundtracks, which like kind of brings you, I guess, more up to now, right? So now you've done like some crazy cool soundtrack stuff and like continuing to do on top of continuing to do your indie stuff. You know, and I think you said you still like track some as well. What would you say are some of the ones for you that you're like, holy shit, like I can't believe I'm getting to do like something like on this level? Obviously the Timbaland and Neo thing was just like insane. But like outside of that,
there was a Megan Thee Stallion track with it for another soundtrack that was like, wait, I'm doing what? So it was pretty cool. Robert Glasper, incredible, you know, composer and musician. We just got our record nominated for 2 Grammys. I'm like, this is insane. Like, it's super cool. I really enjoy working with Stephanie Economou. She's a composer. She's been doing like the Ruby Gilman, like Teenage Kraken. She does a lot of stuff about my father. She's pretty good. She did the soundtrack for Assassin's Creed. And going back to what you were saying, like coming from metal, I feel like she enjoys working with me because, you know, we'll nitpick stuff till death just to make it good. And I feel like that's something very common in metal and not very common in any other genre. So I'm down to sit here all day and like we can work on, you know, half of the VFAQ. Exactly. Like that's normal for me.
That's
right?
the job.
And I don't think that's the experience that a lot of mastering engineers give mixers or even the artists. So I feel like that gets the job done a lot of times, you know. It's kind of like being a good hang online too.
It's also really sick that you're in Austin and doing all this, you know, because like a lot of the people that I know that work in like soundtracks and scoring are in Los Angeles. You know.
Yeah, scoring is LA for sure. I mean, that's the beauty of this. I'm just mastering stuff for them here so I can hide in my cave and do stuff and send it over.
Super sick. It's also how do you like Austin?
I like it. It's definitely changed a lot since I moved. But it is a cool town. It's pretty chill. The people are nice. You know, I had my reservations about moving to Texas at first, but Austin is like a complete different scene from every other city I've experienced.
Totally different pocket.
It's cool.
Me and Lee are really into comedy, so we want to book a trip to Austin at some point, because that's where comedy is now. And
which is crazy to think about.
It's all because of Rogan, because he moved there during the pandemic, and then a bunch of people followed him. And like there's kids moving there just to try to get on Kill Tony, which is nuts.
Well, and this is something that me and Alberto were talking about before you came on, Josh, was like, he was saying like, there's a ton of industry people, like music industry wise, moving out there that are just like, we want to get out, or we need a spot, or we just don't, we want to change the scenery, something like that. And they're like a lot of like, because who are you dropped a couple names.
Like Tom Loralgi's here, Chris Athens, Chris Shaw, Tim Palmer. Yeah, we got some huge people here.
Like that's massive. And like
because people are tired of paying so much to live in LA whenever they don't need to be there, you know.
Or even New York, you know. Everybody got like kicked out with insane prices for
Oh
housing
my
or
gosh.
spaces.
I do not understand how studios exist in New York.
Yeah.
It does not compute. You know,
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
just
crazy.
functionally.
Well, everybody got kicked either to New Jersey or Brooklyn,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, that's
it's
true. I didn't even think about that. Yeah,
it's
because
sad.
that's
Yeah.
Moshe, as a friend of ours, he does a lot of EDM stuff, and he's in Brooklyn. He was like, "Yeah, there's like a lot of. I think in the last 3 or 4 years, probably like everybody got booted out there, and it's
Yeah.
been a whole problem."
Oh yeah, and I'd be scared to be there because it's like an impending doom of like it's coming. You're
Yeah,
definitely next.
yeah. Well, and like, what are they going to do next? Probably
Right.
push them out even further.
Right.
Yeah. Like New York doesn't I don't think that they have rent control, right? Which is why like
Not anymore. Yeah.
everything's yeah. Like I don't
There's
know.
a
It's
couple people
insane,
like
dude.
holding on to spots and pretending that there's grandma lives there and she's 105, but yeah, it's crazy.
That's wild. So,
It's
so
nuts.
I would love to hear from your perspective, like going from bands to soundtrack stuff. Like I feel like obviously there's going to be a difference there, but like there's got to be like a big technical difference there as well. Obviously, outside of the genres vary, but like the expectations are probably pretty different as well.
They're different. I feel like you have to be a little more introspective about what you're working with and kind of listen around to stuff, right? Like if I'm doing maybe like a more orchestral arrangement, I'm just gonna go on Spotify and like listen to a bunch of stuff and trying to find like what this composer does and okay, what are they working on? Do they like stuff like balls to the wall in a more modern way, or do they like crazy dynamics and like listen to their mixes too? Like a lot the mixes will tell you a lot on how stuff
Yeah.
it wants to come, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's probably the wildest thing from like going from metal to like anything else
Yeah.
is like producers are kind of expected to give like a good mix,
right,
even if it's going out to mix. And that rough mix is typically like what the mixer uses to
right,
understand like what they want. Meanwhile, in metal, it was like, oh, we're just going to send out DIs and MIDI drums,
right.
and it's like, it's a completely different approach. And it's cool that you brought that up.
And I feel like it's also more like call it classical mastering, if you will, as opposed to just like let's get it loud and bright and like put it out.
Yes.
It definitely has a lot to do with like, well, how am I dealing here with depth? How what's my space perception here? Is something on the sides bothering me? How's the low end? Is it eating up my compressors? Like stuff like that you wouldn't like necessarily think in a lot of other genres that I've seen that just like blow shit up and let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the evenness across all of them, I'm sure takes like it's a much bigger impact in what you do.
Right. The use of saturation too is another thing that is crazy how much I've learned to listen to it and how it works across different songs. Just like different characteristics of it, right? Like I like to use some compressors for that. So like some songs I'll just fuck with like a Shadow Hills, the mastering compressor, right? And it has like a couple different transformers in there.
Yeah.
And like just subtle differences between those things. Every time I have a friend or somebody that I'm like teaching them how I'm using like my chants and stuff, they're like, holy shit, like you're doing, half a dB and I can hear it. I'm like, yeah, because that's what you should be hearing at this level. Like you should be able to like pick these little things apart and open up the track with minimal things to where the mixer's not going to be like, what the fuck happened? But instead it's like, holy shit, like this sounds huge now, right?
Yeah.
And I like the idea. I like to think of it as like, if the mix is like a show coming up from TV, the master should sound like you're watching it at a movie theater. Like I want it to be wide and big and like that feel you get where like when the speakers crank, you feel it and you get it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of like the excitement I like to get and like the hi-fi-ness of it if that's what the song calls for.
Yeah.
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 Are you also mixing? I mean, mastering the cues for all of these movies as well,
mastering
or mainly
all the
OST?
cues. Well, it's sometimes it's both.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on the soundtrack.
Yeah, so it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot.
Yeah.
That's crazy. What monitors are you on?
I'm on Amphions. I have two
Amphions.
15s. Yeah, and
Very cool.
I pair them with a Genelec sub.
Okay, very
Okay.
cool.
Cool combo.
Yeah, that's sick.
Yeah.
That's very sick.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
I was just curious because that's like a ton of work, but it would make
Yeah.
sense that you're on Amphions because uh that's probably what you were working on at the machine shop, right?
No, the Amphions there came later, so we're all NS10 guys there.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah,
so it's a natural progression.
But yeah,
for
now
you.
the
Yeah.
natural progression is
Yeah.
there
Right.
for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Machine is now on Neumann's. He has 310Ks, and he has
Yeah.
some Ex Machinas in his studio in Austin. But yeah, Will went to Amphions. I think that was the first time I heard Amphions. One time that I stopped at his place.
Yeah. We used to have a full like 218 setup with the with their sub system. I think they call it like
Nice.
the Flex Base or
Yeah.
something like that. And that was a great setup. It was like everything that I loved about like NS10s, but like full range. And if money was no object, I would definitely get one in the future. But it's probably going to be Neumann's.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I'm tempted to get another pair, like a bigger pair of speakers, just for just kind of like reference around. Like right now, I just bounce between the NS10s and those.
Yeah.
And I live mostly on the Amphions. The NS10s is just because I know, especially during mixing, there's a couple things I like to check balance wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm like flirting with the idea of like getting ATCs or something of the sort.
Speaking Josh's language.
Yeah, our friend Seth just went from Amphions to ATCs, and he's very, very happy.
Did he get the 25s or the 45s?
The 25s.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then he's running stereo subs with them.
Gotcha. That's cool.
He's got a wild looking room.
Yeah,
it's great.
He's a dummy. He bought the giant Flex monitor that they make, like it's a TV.
He has like 3 screens at the same time in front of him. It looks ridiculous.
So it's a giant, it's a bent like monitor, and then you can turn it up vertically. And so it's like a big old C, basically, like this in front of you, and he splits it into 3 screens.
That's crazy.
It's a wild looking setup.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane.
Go ahead, Josh.
No, I just got sidetracked.
Okay.
Give me like 2 minutes. I'll be right back.
You're good, dude. I'm going to go ahead and dive into like what are some cool, we'll say mixing and mastering trick wise, what are some cool things that you feel like that you've learned within the past couple of years that have really just like those moments where you're like, oh, that's the thing that I've been like trying to do?
On the mixing side, I will say headroom is everything. I feel like a lot of people either headroom and they think that that's how you get it to sound like punchy and like full. But when they send those mixes to mastering, I feel like it's just like you could have done so much better. I could have blown it up in such a better way if this wasn't like just a big sausage.
I feel like that's probably more prevalent in both hip hop and metal, right? Like trying to crush it from the get-go.
Right. But across the board, it's like if you learn how to pack your compression in small increments across all instruments instead of crushing your mix bus, you'll make such a huge difference, right? Like there'll be like that separation that you won't get.
I feel like no shade to him because I love his stuff, but I feel like Nolly made a whole problem when he was like, oh, let's do top-down mixing, which is a very viable way to mix. But then now you have these guys that are doing top-down mixing, and they're actually just crushing everything at the master and like not doing any kind of compression in buses or at the track level going down. They're trying to just like slam everything at their 2.
Right. So yeah, that's a big one. And then for mastering, one of the big things is try to figure out kind of how I approach mastering is I break down a song and then I put it back together.
Okay.
So what I will do is I kind of mess with the mono and stereo information in a way where like I want to make it, as wide as I have to be. But then when you go wide, like, because making something wide just kind of like fucks with the stereo image in a way that what's in the center is going to get fucked.
And when
So
when it collapses, everything just becomes a big old mess.
And I feel like getting loud in general kind of collapses your mix a little bit to the center. So it's like a balance between that, right? Like my loudness and how I'm keeping the stereo information good.
That's really interesting, because I've never thought about the fact that, but you're right, like as it gets louder, everything does start to kind of just like fold in on itself a little bit.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you're finding that you're like trying to counteract that? What are some just like more specific ways?
The BX digital EQ is a must for me. Just being able to have, you know, I think of it as like if I was mixing the record almost in that spot, because I can go fishing, like in the mono information, I can go fishing for an EQ or like whatever predominant resonant frequencies I want from the vocal that is going to get eaten up, or, you know, maybe it's too bright. Like if I go wide, it's going to eat the vocal, right? So I can kind of look for those frequencies in the vocals where I'll bring him up. So now we're wide and I didn't lose a vocal. Same with a kick, and I can control the sub, and like I can control how much it's hitting and the kick and bass relationship. And then on the stereo side, I can kind of fuck with if it's like a guitar bass song, you know, you can kind of mess with high end frequencies of the guitars to make it sound wider, or you can just kind of like nitpick stuff that is sticking out once you get loud. You can kind of like treat those things.
Yeah.
So that saturation is really cool. It's another way to like glue things if you're very subtle. Like a lot of times I'll be hitting like half a dB of compression, right? But just going through those compressors and like really listening to like your kick and bass relationship and messing with that stuff, like it really either makes things like sound better and opens them up, or it muddies your entire thing. So it's another thing, you know, it's a cool trick to kind of like pick out what's working and what's not in the song.
Yeah.
And then I have a trick where I set my multiband limiters in such a way that sometimes they're super fast, especially in the low end. So for hip hop, for example, that's the number one thing that will eat your limiters, right?
Immediately.
Anytime, there's like low end or a kick comes, is like pumping your whole mix or just like destroying, especially if there's like the sub bass going on. There's so many songs that have that right now that it's just a brick.
Yeah.
So you can't get loud without just destroying that shit, or making
especially
it
in like a
distorted,
Jersey
right?
beat type thing that's just straight, just like sine wave.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and like you'll have the sine wave, but then you'll have these kicks that like you're supposed to feel them, right? And if you're just getting that loud, you're literally making a brick where your speakers are not popping at you. So I set up my multiband limiters in a way where they're pretty fast and like they can tame things at different rates. So like those subs, for example, I can control them a little bit and then like pump those kicks when they come around. So I kind of find ways to get around where the mixer just kind of push everything up to 100. Like, okay, well, I'm going to bring it down a little bit and like make sure I'll give it some movement.
Give it that dynamic. Yeah.
Right. I also love to have meters. I have like a VU meter in front of me. I have a Dangerous Convert 2 that has like a digital meter.
Okay.
So when I get loud, I want to see the needle moving, right? I can go to like just play Apple Music or whatever and go through that genre and find kind of like the dynamic range that stuff is in, right? So if we're listening to something more ethereal sounding or whatever, you'll see like stuff is very low and then something will happen that brings it up and comes down. But for metal, for example, it's a big thing. You'll see anything that has double kicks and it's like fully balls to the wall. A lot of times I feel like on a bad master, like the needle's just pinned, right? You just see like a tiny bit of movement. Yeah. But then you hear a good mix and then you see that, everything's up to 11, but the shit is moving. You're feeling it. And so that's kind of stuff that I like, right? I did a record with Sam Pura for a band called Spirit World. That master is loud as fuck because that was the intention of the band. We wanted to be loud as fuck, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, cool, we'll make it loud, but it's definitely you're gonna feel like it's alive, right? Like we don't want it loud and squash. We want it to be moving, and we want it to feel that energy. So yeah, definitely when you're mastering, like keep that in mind. You don't have to get loud just to get loud, right?
Yeah, you want to keep the dynamics as much as possible. Yeah,
like get loud with purpose if that's what you're gonna do.
Shoo. Good piece of info right there, man. there was something else I was going to ask you. Oh yeah, so are you all in the box or are you using a lot of outboard? That was because you mentioned your dangerous like two bus stuff and
So it depends. For mixing, hybrid. Um, I especially lately I have to work against myself because I hate recalling stuff. Um, not so much recalling stuff, but keeping recall sheets and like I'm so terrible at it. I got a what's it called, session recall now, which is great. I can just put all my settings in there, but I try to print everything now into the session except for my mix bus. So my mix bus is the only thing I'm recalling if I need to. But yeah, I have the stressors for like drums that I like. I have a couple of 1176s, transient designers. Like I'll just do a lot of different stuff and just print it back to the session. So for mixing, I'm always running through my mix bus. I use a C2 and an NTI, which is like the mag of the past. And for mastering, it depends on what I'm being sent. I think of mastering as like two different levels. I have a mix bus and a mastering bus per se. And depending on how processed it is when it gets to me, I'll just either go through the mix bus or not. It also depends on like how much character I want to get. If I feel like the song has character, I'm just going to stay in the box. I don't need to go out, and add shit. It's like, I feel like mastering tools are better in the digital world for me because they're very transparent and that's what I want, right? I want to fix problems and I want to make shit bigger. If I need to get character, then maybe I'll just go around and like fuck around with a compressor here or like fuck with DCQ or get saturation plugins or whatever I have to do. But it all depends on what's coming in.
No, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing is like, do you find that there are different when you're working with different studios, are you getting contact from the studios that are like, do they have a different exec, or are you getting like different producers involved, or is it just kind of like this guy's the project for the record? And do you find that like working on different projects are, as far as the movie side goes and like the soundtrack side goes, do you find that different studios have different expectations, or is it kind of like they have a pretty standard way of doing things?
That world is very different.
That's why I'm very interested, because it's so different from what I'm used to.
Sometimes, like if the composer is the one that brought me in, like in the case of Stephanie, like she brings me in and I work one-on-one with her. And then once we have to deliver stuff, like, we'll just talk with the label and be like, here's the record. A lot of times there's many intermediaries. It's like a crazy chain of emails where, I'll go through this label and the label goes to the management of the artist, and then the management of the artist sends it to the artist and vice versa. And it's like a huge email chain like that. So I would say that world is more trusting. Whenever they send you something, they know you're capable and they're like, okay, do your thing. And then recalls are very minimal sometimes. When you work with the composers, you kind of get more of that interaction of like, we're going to nitpick stuff. I mean, in a good way. I like doing that. So it's all across the board. Every project is so different. It's, sometimes you get guys that are just like, love it, like perfect. Not a single recall, like done. And then sometimes, and also something that I'm always very happy to do is whenever I have a doubt, just because I know time constraints are a crazy thing in here, right? And a lot of times I try to accommodate stuff where if I'm like, I don't know if they're trying to go very dynamic or if they want a little push. So I'll just do both versions and send it to them and just be like, listen, if it was my record, I will go with this version, right? But if you want to hear something a little louder, or you want to hear maybe this idea, like here it is, and then you pick. So that helps sometimes because, I feel like it gives direction. And also you guys mix, like, this whole thing about artists sending you notes that it's like, oh, I needed more blue. And it's like, well, fuck does that mean? Like you kind of have to translate stuff. So it helps for me a lot of times doing that, like sending ABs and being like, this is what I'm listening to, right? Like, do you like more compression or you like less compression? so that, you know, when they come back, they can talk the same language. And
I'm
it's
sure they
not like,
appreciate that as well.
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like not a lot of people do that. So it's something that helps you earn, you know, their trust.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's super interesting. We were talking about mixed recalls, and that's kind of what brought that up. I was like, I wonder how many like actual mixed recalls, because I can't imagine the time constraints on a lot of this, you know, more film related stuff. I know can be so intense sometimes. So it's like it's got to be done yesterday. Sometimes
Right.
that's when you're, especially at the point that you're getting it. It's like they've already ate up a lot of the budget time by the time it gets to you.
This is the story of my life. But I mean, having said that, I'm pretty quick, and you know, I prioritize that a lot of times. So
yeah,
a lot of the people that I work with know that within 24 hours they're gonna get their songs mastered, even if it's, you know, unless sometimes they'll send me records that are huge.
Yeah.
But in 2 days they'll have it. So yeah, it gets crazy. We just finished a soundtrack for a movie that's coming out next week or this week, the 26th. It's called Miller's Girl. Jen Ortega is in it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we got it the first week of January. They told me about it, and they were like, but there's a couple recalls on the mixes that we're waiting, so we might have them a couple days before. And I was like, well, shit, like I'm traveling, but I'll figure it out. Like, you know. And we got it sorted out all out in a week. The composer's happy, I'm happy. Like, so there's stuff like that just happens.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah.
No, general, and I feel like that's just in any kind of, that's the world we work in at this point. You know what I mean?
I'm lucky enough that I've never had to push the record back.
Yeah.
So
hey,
you know,
that's good checklist to keep on. You know,
we've always made it in time, so that's good.
That, you know, I mean, that's, you're doing better than I would say probably a lot of people.
Yeah.
So kind of landing the plane, we already kind of touched on, like, you know, some cool mixed things that kind of helped you unlock some of your brain stuff or mastering things. So let's go on the music side. Let's talk about what you're listening to. I always find that really interesting, of like what different people are listening to. And also I feel like sometimes when we work in music so much, we kind of get stuck in like a rut. So it's good to, you know, get some new things. So like, what are you musically or like listening to wise just been like really stoked on lately?
Better Lovers. So awesome band, you know, it's
Will's
Every Time
band.
I Die, Dillinger and Will put together. Yeah, I love their stuff. There's a band called On People. They were the guys from Preston Echo, is their new band. There's only one song out, but the record is really cool. Yeah, they're killing it. They're from the UK. Really, really awesome band. There's a band called Thumpasaurus from LA.
Thumpasaurus.
They are 100% not what you would expect, but incredibly talented people. And it's all, you know, it's like humor music. It's funky, it's funny. Like, yeah, I like that stuff. You got to watch their videos because they're absolutely ridiculous.
I'm looking at a screen grab from one right now from Lipstick Makeup, and he's like bendy.
Oh, look strutting. That thing is fucking a masterpiece. I love it. We went to see them live a couple months ago, and they were incredible. Like, they're all such talented musicians, and they even brought a guy that does video, and he's like shooting all these random weird ass videos as they're playing. Yeah, it's an experience for sure.
That sounds crazy.
What and then so the other thing is, what are something that you find underrated? Like, what are some artists that you're like, more people need to know about this, or should be listening, or like need to be talking about these people?
Dude, Crowbot is it's a band that I've always thought they should be huge, and they're not getting the attention that they deserve sometimes. They're all like, the singer is fucking, I'm so lucky, I'm working with them right now, but the singer is incredibly talented. It's one of my favorite singers. The guitar player is incredibly amazing. And as a band, they put such a good live show. And yeah, I feel like sometimes they just fall under the radar.
Crowbar? Yeah, they've been around for a minute.
Crowbot.
Oh, Crowbot.
Yeah.
Crowbot.
It's like Crowbar meets a robot.
A crowbar meets a robot.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, dude. I'm going to check them out. What if you had to suggest a song?
Oh man, it depends on what you listen to. But
if you had to suggest a song that this is like, this is quintessential Crowbot.
Okay, if you had to start somewhere,
Yeah.
the Skull of Geronimo is like a close one to my heart. It's from their first record, Something Supernatural.
Okay.
That's a great record. La Mano de Lucifer is amazing too. From their new record, Electrified is awesome. There is the Mother Brain record. It's a little more radio rock, but it has a couple of great songs in there too. Like Burn is awesome. Gasoline's pretty cool.
Heck yeah, dude. No, yeah, I'm adding these. I'm gonna check these out.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to stay up on some like random ass new music. So this looks like random ass new music to me.
I've also been in like, I don't know, call it classic rock kind of feel, like a lot of like Motley Crue, Motorhead, CC Top type stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, dude, that's sick. Yeah, I'm into it. Yeah, I'll check it out. Well, Alberto, thanks for coming on. Let's give the people, if they want to find you, reach out for whatever, or find you on
just Instagram or my website. Just look for Alberto Mixes. I'm there.
It's albertomixes.com.
Yep.
And it's just at Alberto Mixes everywhere, right?
Right.
Easy, man. Making it easy. Easy links for me to do.
Except for my TikTok, because I'm so bad at that. I was like, I'm not going to put it there so people can't find me. I'm just going to fly under the radar there.
Just
and
fly
like
under the radar. Yeah. No, yeah. We'll, I'll make sure to tag you on all this stuff. Cool. And like drop links in the description for anybody that wants to check you out and look through your. I think it's super cool, honestly, just going to your website and checking out your original soundtrack stuff and just like looking at all the stuff that you've been able to do is really cool, man. And also like hella inspiring.
Thank you. That's awesome
dude.
To hear.
Yeah, well, dude, thanks so much again for coming on today and hanging out with us.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the invite and stay in touch.
Of course. Josh, thanks so much for having the chat. And
anytime.
Listeners, thank you so much for listening and watching. We will see you guys in the next one.